I'm really excited to do this video. This was a trend that was going around on Instagram maybe like a month or so ago. As always, I'm very late to the trend, and instead of doing it on Instagram, then I was like, you know what if I made a video like that? Because we know me, I'm long-winded, I like to talk, so I'd rather be able to yap about these books and over-explain myself than just put them in a graphic. So instead, I have the books kind of that like made me, that's kind of the trend here. So I have like teenage me, then I have newbie romance me, then I have like the oh I'm in it me, and then I have current me, and then we also have an honorable mentions stack. So some of my there are so many favorites that like I wasn't able to include in here. That doesn't mean that I don't still love them. It's just that I don't really feel that like they encompassed one of the categories, and I tried to limit each category to like 4 or 5 books each. So this is not going to be a rec video. I'm not going to give like in-depth explanations or like blurbs of each of these books. More so just kind of sharing with you how my reading taste has evolved over the years, and how my reading taste even from like childhood really shaped my reading as an adult. I always was reading, but I wouldn't classify myself as like a huge reader. Even as a teenager, like I read some books, but I think I didn't find romance until much later in my life, and that is where like my love for reading like really kicked in. There were books when I was younger that I loved, but I would say that I never like had found my genre. However, there were some that were very formative and are still favorites to this day for me. So teenage me, like the first book series that I ever remember reading and absolutely loving and being obsessed with is The Hunger Games. I feel like that's a lot of people around my age. That is kind of like their first foray into reading. I was never a Harry Potter person. I never read those books. I still have never read them. It was always Hunger Games for me, and I got this beautiful special edition of it. Oh, she's stunning. But I love the Hunger Games books. I love the Hunger Games movies. And still to this day, like I do love a dystopian novel. I would say I don't read a ton. Honestly, if there was like dystopian romance, if someone has a dystopian romance book rec for me, please drop it below. I would love to check it out. I still love these books to this day. I just reread them. I don't think it was last year. I think it was the year prior that I did a reread. Honestly, I might do another one because Sunrise on the Reaping, well, I'm not going to have them all done before Sunrise on the Reaping comes out. That's literally in less than a month. But anyways, next Hunger Games book is coming out soon, and I'm so excited for it. Very formative. Loved Katniss. Loved the love triangle. I was always a PETA girl. Then next, Divergent by Veronica Roth. So I read these when I was a freshman in college. So I was a little later to them than a lot of other people were. However, I was completely unspoiled reading them. And you know what? I'm going to spoil them now. These books have been out for like over 10 years because they had 10th anniversary editions, 2011. I'm going to spoil this series. If you don't want spoilers, then skip ahead. But also, I don't know how many of you are just now picking up Divergent or don't know what happens. But I will say there is something extremely formative in this book that has carried over into my reading to this day. And that is Tris, our heroine in this, dies. Yep, she dies at the end of these, if you did not know. The movies are different because they never finished the 4th movie. That 3rd movie, garbage. 2nd movie, not great. 1st movie, stellar. First Divergent movie is a slay, okay? I don't care what anyone says. I absolutely loved that Tris died by the end of these books, okay? I feel like that's a very unpopular opinion. People still to this day are in Veronica Roth's comment section, like ripping her apart for that. You won't ever catch that from me. This is the perfect ending to this character's. Okay, this is not a video essay on why I think that was a great decision. I will just say, this has shaped why I love untraditional romance books still to this day. I don't read a ton of them because obviously there aren't like a whole lot out there, but some of them, all-time favorites, they're great. And I think my love for that stems from this because I love purposeful and meaningful character death, and Veronica Roth is very ruthless with her characters and cutting them off when they need to and for the story's higher purpose, and I love that. So Divergent series was very formative for me. Same with The Spectacular Now by Tim Tharp. This is one of my all-time favorite books, one of my all-time favorite movies. I prefer, okay, granted, I love the movie so much. I love Shailene Woodley and Miles Teller. I think they are perfect in their roles in this movie. It's some of the most beautiful cinematography. Like, it's just, I love this movie with my whole heart. However, I will say, the movie ends differently. It ends on like a happier note where once again, no one's dying at the end of this, but it doesn't end like happily. And Sutter is one of my favorite like fictional characters of all time. And I just, you know, if you've read this and you kind of know how the story ends, I like that. Again, I like that it's not just like cookie cutter. It's not just like a happily ever after. It's like very realistic to life and like mirrors real life, which I love. But yeah, The Spectacular Now, again, one of my all-time favorite books and very formative for me. The last one that I have in this earlier category is Carve the Mark by Veronica Roth. So this is a fantasy duet, or a sci-fi duet from her. And this is where, this is now looking back on, I know where I was like craving the romance, but I didn't know that the romance genre was out there. And we'll get to that in a second. But in this book, the chemistry between these two characters is so good, and it's enemies to lovers. I absolutely love this duet. I read it when it came out because if you pre-ordered this, you got a Divergent series epilogue, which I hate that epilogue actually, but I loved this book and like it ended up being great that I got it. I've read it so many times that literally like it's peeled away. I also read it back when I was like a lot harder on my books. I'm definitely a lot more gentle with them now, but it's like literally falling apart. Don't know how many times I've read this duet. I absolutely love it. But like I said, the standout thing for me in here was the chemistry and also like the world. Like I loved that. So I think that definitely carried over into my romance journey. Now from here on out, I only have romances. I'm not including fantasy. So I'm not including ACOTAR or Throne of Glass, even though Throne of Glass is my all-time favorite book series, like ever. We are just specifically talking about romances on here because I do mostly focus on romance content here. So now we are moving into, I'm learning what romance is. All my life, I only ever thought, like, so my mom is a big reader, but she never read romance. So I never knew that it was a genre, quite frankly. I didn't really have friends who were reading it and talking about it at all. So I fully didn't know that it existed besides historical romances or like Nora Roberts. My grandma's a big Nora Roberts fan. So like I knew that those were out there, but I fully was completely blind to any romance genres, indie romance, traditionally published romance, fan fiction, until that is. I used to work at Family Video. I worked there for 7 years. It was one of my favorite jobs I ever had. Like, it was great. And we would get this thing called pre-streeting. When the new movies would come into Family Video, before you would put them out on Tuesday when they released, like when they were streeted, you could take them home and watch them. So normally we had like a few days to be able to do that. Well, we got this one movie in called After. And I was like, that looks kind of good. I'll take it home and watch it. I took it home. I watched it and I was like, what is this? I need more of this. And at the beginning, I think it had said like based on The Sensation by Anna Todd. So you know what I did? I Googled what is After by Anna Todd. I checked out this book from the library. I've never looked back. I have never looked back. So I know people have varying opinions about After, but it will forever and always be so special to me and one of my favorite romance series ever. If you can't tell, this book, once again, it was back before I was a lot nicer to them. I don't know how many times I read this. I got the first book checked out from my library. Well, then I devoured it and I was like, I need this second book. And I also didn't know that it was on Wattpad. So I was like, I need the second book, but it wasn't available. And I, believe it or not, used to not really buy books that much. So it was a big deal for me to get the box set of these. I finished them in like a week. I couldn't put these down. And this is where not only my love for romance started, but my love for toxic romances even more started. I still to this day just love and adore this series. One of my favorites of all time. But yeah, so I read these. And this was like, again, some of like my favorite reading memories ever was devouring those. Then after that, then I was starting to just look up like books similar to After. Again, I didn't know about BookTube. I didn't know about any of that. And so I ended up finding then Bared to You by Sylvia Day. So the Crossfire series. Then this was, I think, the next series that I jumped into after. And again, checked them all out from the library before I bought any copies when I started like building up my own library. I just remember, again, devouring these. Also, I used to take these into work and read them on my lunch break. Where now, okay, there's nothing about not reading like romance at work. Like I take my Kindle, but I take my Kindle now. I was letting this just like sit on my desk. I don't know. I was bold without really even trying to be back then. But yeah, absolutely loved the Crossfire series, Billionaire Romance series, BDSM, which again, I still read a lot of things similar to this, just not necessarily these anymore, but very formative in my early romance days. And then now, what I think are my two official kind of indie romances that I read, but I will say, again, my library had the Off-Campus series, so again, I checked out the Off-Campus series. This was before I had a Kindle, before I had Kindle Unlimited, and I read The Deal. And once again, I love hockey romances. To this day, The Deal would still be one of my favorite books of all time. The Mistake is my favorite in the series. Well, it goes back and forth between The Deal and The Mistake, but truly still some of my all-time favorites. Like, these books stand up over time to me. Like, every time I read them, I still love them the same. I'm still entertained the same. This was, again, my first hockey romance, which we know that has still stuck around after. And this was my first ever, I would say, like, indie romance that I read, because once again, I was pretty much up until this point only reading books that I could check out from my library. I had read some other like traditionally published romances, but I wasn't finding like a lot that I was like loving besides like off campus and stuff. And then this was when I had started finding BookTube, and all these people were recommending these books that my library didn't have. And I was like, why doesn't my library have them? But I didn't have a Kindle yet. I didn't have Kindle Unlimited. So it was, I don't know how long I sat with Birthday Girl. I should have pulled off my other Birthday Girl, but it's like buried under a stack. I don't know how long I sat with Birthday Girl by Penelope Douglas in my Amazon cart for, because I was like, am I really about to spend $17 on a book that I've never read? What if I don't like it? Now, like, don't bat an eyelash at buying books, but at the time that was a really big deal to me. And I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna like this book, but everyone keeps talking about it and saying that it's great. And it's an ex-boyfriend's dad, and like, that's kind of weird, but like, am I gonna like that? Oh, like 22-year-old me, was that how old I was when I read this book? Like, had no clue what I was getting myself. No, maybe I was like 23, because it was during the pandemic. It was 2020. So how old am I? 5 years, subtract 5 years. How old am I? I'm 28. Why can't I do simple math? 23-year-old me truly had no idea what I was doing when I purchased this book, because I was obsessed. Again, I remember waking up early before work. It was like during the pandemic, but I remember specifically waking up before work to read this book, or like on the weekends before I would like go up and socialize with my family, I would like just sit and read this book. I couldn't put it down. And still to this day, we know how much I love Penelope Douglas and all of their books. And yeah, Birthday Girl is that first, what I would consider like my first big jump into indie romances. Even though, like I said, I'm pretty sure Elle Kennedy, the Off-Campus series, was indie obviously when I read it still, but like I said, my library had it. But Birthday Girl, special book for me. Okay, now we are moving into the like, oh, I'm in it category. Okay, so this is at the time when I got myself a Kindle. This was, okay, so probably like 2021 to 2022 territory, where I was doing nothing but reading books. Okay, it's the middle of the pandemic, or not middle, I guess the pandemic is still going though. I don't have a lot going on in my life. I'm not writing yet. So I literally, all I'm doing is reading books. Okay, I'm not socializing. I'm not doing anything. I'm sitting with my Kindle. And this is like the books kind of from that era of my romance journey. And still to this day, looking at this book, favorite. Like, they are all still across the board. Books that I talk about all the time on my channel, books that I recommend to everyone. And yeah, these are in no particular order because I don't remember what order I read them all in. But yeah, let's just go ahead and jump in with Corrupt. We'll tag off of Birthday Girl, because after I read Birthday Girl, I was like, I need to read everything that this author has written. So once I got a Kindle, I think I want to say maybe the very first books I ever read on my Kindle were the Devil's Night series. Corrupt through Killswitch were out. Nightfall was not yet at the time when I read them. And Devil's Night series were, I still think, my first dark romances that I ever read. Again, they're all very toxic. They're very fun. The antics, the found family aspects in here. There's still like some taboo that comes into play with a lot of them. A lot of the tropes and themes from these books, again, I feel like you still see reflected in my favorite books that I read today. I've reread these. I absolutely love them. I love companion style books, you know, how each book follows a different couple. Devil's Night series is very special. And again, Corrupt was one that when I read this book, I was like, everyone in my life needs to read this book. So I recommended it to my friend Olivia. Now, she's not watching, but if she was, she could quote me on this. When I lent this book. Also, this was back when I used to loan out books. Now I don't loan out books to like anyone because, you know, they're just like they're my children. But I let her borrow this book. And I remember telling her like, oh my gosh, you have to read it. It's so great. And at the time, her opinion would probably change now. If I gave her this book now, she probably like wouldn't really like balk at it. But at the time, she's kind of like, what the fuck are you reading? Where now, I think she'd like it. She reads a lot more like indie romances now. But at the time, where I was like, this shit is great, other people were like, what are you doing? Okay, I think this was my first ever student-teacher romance I ever read. Actually, don't quote me on that. Maybe it's not. Maybe I just lied. Well, not lied. I don't know. I think actually it might be a different book we're going to talk about later, but Dark Notes by Pam Godwin. Another very, very formative book for me. And like I said, it's one of the early student-teacher books. If it's not the first, it's one of the earliest ones that I ever read. This is the Mystic Box special edition of it, because once again, my regular copy is like down at the bottom of a pile of books. I absolutely love this book. Again, where I really was like, oh, I really like dark romance. This was very formative for that. And also I liked the taboo nature of the student-teacher relationship, which still to this day is one of my favorite tropes. Again, very special to me. Then we got my first ever Mafia books that I ever read, which again, still to this day, all-time favorite series. And I just pulled off the first two of both of them, the Born in Blood Chronicles and the Camorra Chronicles by Cora Riley. I love these Mafia universes so much. My favorite in Born in Blood is Bound by Hatred, book 3, and my favorite in the Camorra Chronicles. It's like a tie, honestly, between 1, 2, and 3. Probably Twisted Pride is my favorite. That's book 3 in there. But I love both of these. Again, this is where I started to love like the companion style romances even more, where I was really honing in on that. These were the first Mafia books that I ever read, and I liked that they felt very like old school kind of Godfather-ish Mafia vibes. I really liked the interconnected styles of like New York and Chicago families, and then like the Las Vegas families and how they're all like crossing over. Really enjoyed that. Again, the arranged marriage. I had never read anything like that before, so that was really exciting. I've done rereads on these. They still stand up for me in terms of like enjoyment level. Ironically enough, Twisted Loyalties, actually my boyfriend just read. We did like a bit of a book swap. So I gave him the Twisted Loyalties audiobook is on Spotify. So he was able to read that. And then when he was talking about this book and he was like, wait, it's not over. And I was like, well, they're over. But like there's like 20 books in this world. Like this is just the beginning. There's so much lore to these. Like I have a whole video on my channel explaining the Cora Riley Mafia universe. Like it's intense, but it's still a favorite. Okay, then we got 2 more because I felt I couldn't limit myself to just like 4 in this category because there were, like I said, there were so many at the time that I was obsessed with. Sweet Dandelion by Macaulay Smeltzer, still to this day, probably one of the most I would say like in my real life recommended romances to people that I know, because it's slow, like yes, it's big, but it's slow burn. It's a little, it is taboo, but it's like, because it's slow burn, I feel like you really get to know them. And it, like, obviously, yes, it's forbidden, but like, it feels grounded, you know, for like people who don't read a lot of romance to still be able to like jump in. It's guidance counselor and student age gap romance. Like, I love this book again. And this, I think, was one of the first books that I read where the mental health representation in it, I was like, oh, I like really love that. Like, I want to read more of that. I want to read more characters that like have this, you know, have these things that they're working through. This is like the earliest memory I have of that. So, still, it has a new cover now, sadly. This is like one of my favorite covers still to this day. I'm so sad that it's no longer the cover anymore. I love like the fine line over it, but absolutely love this book. Last but not least, you guys knew it was coming. We got Balance, because let me tell you, I got a bit of a story with this one. Of course, I got a bit of a story with all these, but I specifically remember with this one, I had seen it recommended over and over again by lovely like Laura on it. She doesn't make videos anymore, sadly, but she was like my OG who I first like started getting into with BookTube, and she talked about this book all the time and talked about the Off Balance series. And I remember the 5th one, Dismount, was getting ready to come out, and she did like another video talking about it, and I had always been interested in picking them up. However, now that I had a Kindle and a Kindle Unlimited subscription, I once again fell into, I don't like buying books that aren't on Kindle Unlimited, and I still kind of am that way. But at the time, I really didn't like buy ebooks, and these were only available as ebooks. After hearing about it enough, I was like, okay, I'm gonna download the first one. And as I was reading the first book, the series got banned again. Like, Dismount had come out, and once again they got banned. If you were never around during that whole lore, I mean, you actually didn't miss out, because it was horrible. But anyways, I ran to Lucia's website. I also found out recently that I've been saying her name wrong this whole time. I guess it is Lucia, my bad. I ran to her website and I bought the rest of them because I was like, oh my God, I need these books so badly. And once again, I did a reading vlog for all of these books. This one was in my first ever Banned, Forbidden, and Taboo romance video, like vlog style video. And then I also did an entire Off Balance series reading vlog, which I'm sure is so cringy looking back on now. But I love these books. My favorite romance series of all time. These will never be topped. I love these two characters more than like, I love them so much. I will defend this series to anyone and anyone who wants to challenge me on it. I love these books. I love Rhea and Kova, and the things that I would do to get Kova POVs. Oh my God. It's like, I would do anything. I would pay any amount of money to get those. I love this series so much. And again, some of my fondest reading memories. I literally my Kindle didn't leave my hand when I was reading all 5 of these books. Like, I carried it around my house everywhere with me. Everywhere. Any spare second, I was reading these. Like, I genuinely couldn't put them down. So yeah, this I'd say one of the besides like After, again, some of the most formative romances, and again, tropes that still to this day I love. And now we have current day me, which this was kind of hard because I do feel like so many of my still ride or die favorite books I read between the spans of 2020 to 2023. I feel like I read so many really like ride or die favorites. And now, like, don't get me wrong, last year I still read a lot of books that I absolutely loved, and I do have a couple that have made it on this list. But I just feel like not as many like recent books that I've read would I say are at the same level in terms of like what make me, you know? But I did find 5 that I genuinely feel like fit perfectly. But I do have 2 that are a little older on there, which I'm going to do those first. Unfurl by Elodie Hart. I think I read this one a couple of years ago. But this is a forbidden age gap, but specifically it's a spicy club. And if you know me, I had a big phase of spicy club romances where that's all I wanted to read. I wanted to read about everyone going to their spicy club on the weekend, having fun, and then going about their everyday life. Like, I loved that. I still do love that. I've taken a little bit of a break from them because I read a lot and kind of burned myself out on them. But I loved this. And specifically with this one, there is a lot of like religion discussion in it that I personally enjoy. I like kind of reading about people processing religion and how maybe they were raised versus how they see it in their life now, how they see it playing a role, and other people using it as a role in their lives and like other people's lives. I find that really interesting, and I love that Unfurl does that. Then Twisted Hate is the other a little bit older one, but again, this is one of my all-time favorite hate to love romances. Okay, like these 2 did it. They delivered. I love Anna Huang's books. I talk about them a lot. I've read a bunch of them. Like, she's one of my all-time favorite authors, and Twisted Hate is my favorite in the Twisted series. I've reread it. It still stands up. And yeah, I just feel like I couldn't not include Twisted Hate in this video. Then these 3 are a little more recent. So I have Garen Park by Nordica Knight. This is an MM romance, and this is a motocross, and again, enemies to lovers and like hate benefits kind of. Again, these 2, like, toxic, they're fighting. It wasn't my first ever MM book. I know I've read others. I love these 2. I love this book. I love like the connection between these characters. Everything about this book just like worked for me. It was my favorite of 2023. And yeah, I feel like, again, it kind of encompasses a lot of the things that I loved, kind of like the toxic romances of like After, Balance, you know, like it still lives on through my love for Garen Park. Then we have God of Wrath by Rena Kent. Have I shut up about this book since I read it last year? No, this is an all-time favorite book of mine. This is genuinely like in my top probably like 15 favorite books of all time. Why 15? That's such a random number. This is the 3rd book in the Legacy of God series. It's a stalker romance. It's a college. It's a 2nd generation. So he's the son of a mafia lord, which again, I'm never going to be out of my mafia mood. Okay. I love mafia books. No, I don't think I'll ever write one. I'm sorry. I know I've been asked that. I don't think I have it in me to write mafia. I don't know. Never say never, but probably not. But anyways, he ends up stalking her, and it's just like the best ever. And this was genuinely a book that I read last year where I never wanted it to end. Like, I was purposely like reading it slowly because I genuinely didn't want it to be over. because I loved it that much. And that rarely happens to me. So this is very, very like, in recent years, literally favorite book I've ever read. And lastly, Head in the Game by Rebecca Raith. This one again carries on with the age gap, with the with the taboo, with the slow burn, with the like we shouldn't be doing this vibes. I love that. I love forbidden romances. I always have. I love the tension that it creates in books. It does have like a little bit of like a darker edge to it, which is fun. It's a coach athlete book. It's football, which I don't really care about. Like, that's not my favorite compared to like hockey, but still I like the sports setting. I love everything about this book. And again, I feel like it's one that in recent years has been up there, that I talk about a lot, that I think about a lot. So we had to include it. And last, I just have a rapid fire honorable mentions where these books didn't make it into any of the other categories, but I feel like I needed to mention them because they are 4 kind of like staple books for me. So again, we have The Unrequited. This is the other one where I was like, this might have been my first student teacher book. I don't actually know, but I love this one. It is my favorite Saffron Kent book that I've ever read. Also, I am obsessed with this special edition. If you have read the book, then like these little Easter eggs on it. It's perfect. I love it. Melissa, thank you so much once again. She picked this up at Love in Las Vegas. Was it Love in Las Vegas? She picked it up. It was a sign-in exclusive and she picked it up for me. And I'm so grateful to have it on my shelves because genuinely a favorite book of all time. So I had to include that one. Again, love for student teacher. Kiss the Sky by Kristen Beccarecci. The Addicted/Calloway Sisters series was a huge series for me. Like, I'm still reading their children's books. I'm still making my way through the Like Us series. Like, literally this whole bookshelf is basically their books. But truly, Kiss the Sky, Rose and Connor. Rose specifically, one of my favorite heroines I've ever read. I love the two of them. Had to include that. Y'all already know Always Been You had to be on here. Genuinely one of my favorite books ever. Once again, this is an adopted siblings, very forbidden romance. Moves pretty quickly. Like, they kind of get into it quite quickly. But once again, we know how I love the spice. We know how I love QB's books. And this is my favorite of hers. And again, I have literally talked about this book for years. And then last but certainly not least, if we're carrying on the themes that I talked about, if you recall from my very first few books that I talked about on this list and something that I loved, we gotta include Forbidden. The way that this book wrecked me and that I still think about it to this day when I read it back 5 years ago, this book crosses my mind on like a semi-regular basis. So that should tell you something. This one, once again, I read it for my first ever Banned, Forbidden, and Taboo reading vlog because it's extremely taboo. I will warn you, you know, this book is not going to be for everyone, but it is one of my all-time favorites. It's one that I like don't think I've really ever recommended besides to you guys. Like, no one in my real life am I telling to read this book because this is truly one where it's like, it's definitely not for, you know, the majority of people. I'm still devastated by this book. I actually really need to do a reread on it, quite frankly, because I just want to hurt my own feelings again. But it definitely made me question things. And once again, one of the most taboo books I've ever read. But I mean, at this point, we're not surprised. I read a lot of taboo things and that's just how it goes. I like that. So anyways, those are kind of like I said, the books that like made me. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Something kind of different. Anyways, that is it for today's video. What do I have? I actually have my whiteboard over there. Maybe. Actually, I'm probably not going to pull that together. I was maybe thinking next week I would be doing a chat show and get ready with me. Honestly, I am on deadline for goalie, so I think you're only going to have one video next week, and I think it's just going to be my March TBR, so I am sorry about that. But as always, when we get around deadline, something's got to give, and it ends up being this channel a lot, unfortunately, but I promise I think you guys are really going to like goalie, so... especially, you know, with some of the books that the books have made me, I feel like you guys are really going to see that kind of reflected in goalie a little bit. So anyways, that is it for today's video, and I will see you when I see ya.